Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Halsford. We are all familiar with them, the big social media companies that have become ubiquitous in our lives, the Facebooks, Twitters, Instagram, and TikToks of the world. Most of us grew up in a time before these giants existed, but as they are geared towards young people, children and teens today are much more online during their developmental ages than anyone in history. So what effects do these companies have on the growing brain? What possible downfalls are there for teens, their families, and even the schools they attend? That's the subject of this month's show, the effects of social media on teens and young people. We're going to take it in 3 parts. Up first is a conversation with Burlington Youth and Family Service individual and family therapist David Langford about what experts say are ways to help young people stay safe online and the potential impacts of social media platforms on parents and other adults should keep in mind. We'll then talk to BHS Principal Mark Sullivan about the role of schools in helping students navigate these platforms. And finally, we'll talk to Burlington School Resource Officer Keith Shepard about potential online threats and how to combat issues such as bullying. We have a lot to get to, so let's get started. I am now joined by David Langford of Burlington Youth and Family Services to talk about some of the social emotional impact that social media has on teens. Thank you, David, for taking some time and coming down today.
Of course.
And I just wanted to start off with, since a lot of the social media is just so new and, it's not really had a long time to really study it. A lot of people who work in the field didn't grow up using it as teenagers. What's the best way to sort of assess what kind of impacts are happening, with our young people?
Yeah, I think the first thing to recognize is, like you were saying, this is, for a lot of us adults, it's new to us. For our young people, it's it's the air they breathe. It's what they're growing up in. So I think recognizing that, in some ways, we're trying to see these practices and how our teens are using social media almost kind of from an outsider perspective. So I think a healthy dose of respecting that they're on the front lines would go a long way.
Yeah, so it's really kind of just looking at them and just talking with them and saying, what are you feeling?
Oh yeah, and I think as adults trying to speak with young people about social media use and technology and all that, a little curiosity is helpful too. If we come in with judgments or with assumptions, you come in assuming that social media is bad, then it keeps you from being curious and getting, I think, the information you'd want.
Yeah. And when you do talk to, some of the younger people, what are some of the things that they tell you?
I speak with young folks about social media. It's increasingly clear to me that social media it's kind of where things are happening. It certainly doesn't replace in-person, face-to-face interaction, but it is it's its own kind of town square. This is where things are happening. So, which tells me that talking about it as good or bad or in these kind of totalizing terms is
right.
Really helpful. Yeah.
Like there could be good things that they get out of the experience as well.
Of course, yeah.
I'm sure it does help make, does what it's supposed to do, make connections, sort of
give
people a sense that you can hear from voices they might not have heard of otherwise.
You can get perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't have had exposure to, and you can hear ideas that you otherwise wouldn't have had to wrestle with, yeah.
Now, some of the mechanics of social media and how it sort of works seems to be some of the issues that some people have. Again, I don't want to cast everything as either negative or positive, but there is this narratives that came out about like students feeling depression because they would post a photo of themselves and they'd get 4 interactions and the other more popular person would get 200, 300. So that almost like ranking system, it's it's organic, but it must be impactful is what I'd say.
Yeah, it's interesting, those likes and views and things like these ranking systems, I think it's easy to imagine that those are like, indices of engagement or these kind of objective assessments, but we all know that those are systems that can be gamed, and And just like, other, TV and all this kind of juices, views and all this, there's people and practices that are designed to get more likes, and those
Right.
practices aren't always like good mental health practices.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not, here's me sitting down doing my homework necessarily.
Right.
It's,
Right.
maybe exposing a little, skin or doing something,
sure.
that sort of makes other people more interested in what your content
Sure.
is.
Or here's a provocative statement that I know will get people talking, good or bad.
Right.
I'll make a stink because I'll say the thing that everybody's afraid to say or something like that. Yeah.
Right, which is actually sort of one of the inspirations for this show this month, is because we did have something in Burlington a few weeks ago where a student posted something. It was kind of threatening. It was mostly deemed to be non-credible threat, just bad idea, but probably just trying to get that, people will at least react to this.
Yeah.
And it gets out of hand.
And isn't that interesting? There's something about an idea, especially a really provocative idea that, if somebody says something like that in person, it's easy enough to get ignored, but when it gets put out, in this kind of very public, permanent place,
exactly.
It requires a different response, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just somebody muttering and there are three friends here. It looks like you put it out there, you don't know who's going to see it. It could be somebody from the school administration eventually.
And and that makes me think too about the difference between social media, between things that are muttered under my breath versus things that are put on social media. I think especially as adults entrusted with the care of young people, we feel a sense of responsibility for what's out there. So if a young person is muttering something under their breath, it's one thing, but if they're putting it out there and then I read it, I kind of have a responsibility to respond.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I mean, there does sort of create that, almost need to take it seriously. And speaking of that, and so there's all these platforms. Obviously, we all know the big ones of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but there's a lot more that have different sort of, I don't know, cultures, I would say. Sometimes it can be negative, but also it's not some place that I think a lot of people who are not enmeshed in that world would even know to look. So is it beyond parents just to, should they just be asking their kids? Should they be doing a little investigative work just to make sure things are okay?
Yeah. So I'm guessing, if you're a parent and you're wanting to know, hey, my kid's on this platform, what does that really mean? That's a good one. I think that as parents or adults invested in the lives of young people, it's okay to be curious and just ask. I think, again, if you're wanting to know, you probably need to check some of your own biases and your own assumptions. And am I asking because I'm scared? Well, let's be upfront about that. Hey, I've got this worry. Is this like a safe place? I'm worried that you're putting something out there. So I would encourage parents, if you're wanting to know, the platform that they're on and what's it about, what's the culture like, own your own assumptions, present those, and then ask and be curious. All
right.
Yeah.
And what about the companies themselves? There was that whole leak from Facebook a couple months ago saying that they knew, that
the Instagram papers,
that Instagram was causing depression, causing sometimes leading up to, as far as even suicide. What do they have to do? Yeah,
that's a good question. Here's my opinion. I think especially given the pandemic, there's this opportunity for us all to really rethink our responsibilities toward other people and the effects that our actions have on others. And I think that goes for individuals, groups, and on up. And so I think that's what I'd say to that.
Yeah.
People if you're making, you have the ability to make these companies have the ability to make a lot of money off of engaging young people. It makes sense to me that they also have the opportunity to take a lot of responsibility.
Right. Which traditionally they have not been wanting to do, but
sometimes those two are
maybe
each other out.
There is of course that, but I think now that it's sort of coming into the light more, I think maybe they will have to take some changes just to say.
And I think it's an opportunity to teach young folks to have a critical view about these things. What's the saying? If you're if you're on one of these platforms for free, then you are the product. You
Right,
know?
exactly.
I mean, I think there's a way to teach young folks and to sort of let them in on how these things work. Hey, here's how Facebook makes money, and when these posts that are really aggravating, and so you respond. People are using Facebook.
Well,
Well, some are, yeah. No, but kind of lifting the curtain a little bit, and us as adults being able to teach them, hey, here's how they're making money off of you, and here's practices that you can use to retain your privacy, to retain your dignity,
Right.
to sort, so.
Yeah, if something triggers you and you respond, negatively or in any kind of way, it's still good for the company because they're
Right.
still getting that,
Right.
the information. They're still getting the sort of the popularity of the post that they
Yeah.
use then to push it out on
Exactly.
other people.
And it's interesting because, again, I have faith that when young people know, for example, that, there's so what is it? TikTok will,
Right.
will
We didn't even talk about
wants
that,
you to, view these videos all the way to the end. And so then you can look at the videos and look at tactics. Oh, okay, they're keeping me on here. They're going to not show me the thing until these strategies that people are using. I think it's a good teaching opportunity. How am
Right.
I being kind of
Yeah.
led around a little bit?
I mean, and a lot of it is just manipulation. And it's not just young people, obviously.
Yeah.
We see it with Facebook a lot, that some people who are well into their older years are falling and posting
Yeah.
some pretty ridiculous things.
I say we need to teach our young people. Well, I guess it also goes the other way too.
Yeah.
We all need to learn a little bit about, how to
Exactly.
be critical of again, who's making money, who's benefiting from this. If I'm looking at my phone and getting hot under the collar because so and so posted a thing I disagree with, someone's probably like getting some money off of that.
Right, exactly. No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So if, somebody does come to their parents or to a teacher and they're like, listen, I'm feeling depressed, I'm, feeling overwhelmed by just everything that I see online, what kind of services or what kind of, programs are available for those who love the kid to reach out and get help?
Yeah. Well, Burlington Youth and Family Services is the town social services and mental health department, and we offer individual and family counseling. If families of students would be interested in seeing clinicians, I know in my work it involves a lot of listening to families, listening to different family members' concerns, maybe about social media use or about any of a number of topics, and really helping families to come up with solutions on their own. Oftentimes it's helpful for families to get in a room with someone who has a bit of an outsider perspective, who can notice patterns that maybe they can't, and facilitate solutions that are non-blaming, non-shaming, but are actually helpful and
Right.
kind of get everybody moving forward.
All right.
Yeah.
So the help is out there for those who need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we've exhausted a good portion of the questions that I had for you.
Yeah.
So I really, once again, I just want to say thank you for taking some time and sharing your expertise with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right. We go now to my conversation with Burlington High School Principal Mark Sullivan about what schools can do to help students navigate and stay safe online. I am now joined by Burlington High School Principal Mark Sullivan. Mark, thanks for taking some time and coming and talking about this subject with us.
Thank you, Rich. I'm happy to be here.
So, in your time as working in education, how have you seen sort of the evolution of students and online behavior?
Well, when I first started, technology really didn't exist. It was desktop computers. It was really just editing of documents. Computing wasn't nearly what it is today. So it's really been the last 10, 15 years where technology has really shifted the educational landscape, the professional landscape in people's work environments, and even more so in people's social environments and how they interact with their friends, with their family, how they share news and get news and information. It seems like every other year there's a new social media app or something that's out that, so it's still growing now. So I don't think we've even peaked in terms of where it's going to go.
No.
But it has shifted dramatically over the last, really 5-10 years.
Yeah, it seems like, especially now, with the last year, people learning online and everything as well, it's just
Yeah.
sort of like
Yeah.
more of their lives are spent in that space than ever before.
Definitely, yeah. I think the social emotional impact of kids not being in school full time, obviously they were directed towards devices, both for school and for personal reasons. So I think it was like a double whammy, so to say. Usually when the kids are in school, there's a balance of when they use technology, a lot of social interaction with peers, with students, extracurricular activities, athletics, like the variety of things that our kids involved with. There's usually a balance where kids can have screen time, use their phones, iPads, but in the same time it's offset when they're in school because they're also having a lot of social interactions with other people, either in classes, passing in the halls at lunch in the cafeteria, or just during the multiple or different activities that they're involved with. So they don't always have their screens out. But now that they're learning at home and they're alone, or they're with just their families, during COVID, during the pandemic, they were really forced into like constant interaction with their phones that replaced all those social interactions. So definitely an uptick, and the social emotional impact of that is significant, and one that I'm sure we'll see the ramifications for several years.
Yeah, and when students are having issues, with social emotional, aspects, what sort of resources are available if they wanted to reach out to somebody?
So there's lots of resources for parents and students that are having difficulty or if they're having issues. There's a multi-tiered approach at the high school and in the community. So depending on the issue, depending on the severity of what's happening, it could be as simple as reaching out to your child's counselor and having a conversation, reaching out to the teacher to talk about an issue in a classroom. But we have a tiered approach that could escalate all the way to different programming for kids, involvement of the administration, counseling, support services, mental health connections that we have in the community that we can set kids up with. So it really depends on the situation, but there are a variety of ways that we can support kids, from very simple, just conversation-based, all the way up to very structured programmatic offerings during the school day where they would get support in addition to their academic classes.
Okay, so a little more like, getting in depth and really working with them one-on-one. And
every situation is different, yeah, so it depends on the student, it depends on what it is that they're dealing with. A lot of times there's a conflation of issues that kids might be having at home and in school. Sometimes it's hard to separate the two. It's a dual effect on kids. So it depends. So we can certainly approach the academics and the supports in school. We can address some of those mental health through counseling and other support services that we have. And then we can connect kids to community resources, whether it's counseling, other programmatic offerings, and different things that would help them both in and out of school.
Now, before everybody was sort of living online, if there was an issue with, let's say, bullying or harassment, it would be sort of more visible. It happened in the cafeteria or outside of school, in the school parking lot or something like that. But now when it happens online, what's the school's role? If it's like one student to another, but maybe they're not doing it obviously while they're in school, but
Sure.
It's still impacting two students. What's sort of the role of the school department in those situations?
So first, the general rule is if it's going to impact the student's ability to access the curriculum, if it's going to impact any student's ability to come to school without fear of being harassed or intimidated or abused physically or emotionally, it's the school's prerogative and responsibility to intervene. We've had situations where things have happened in the community over the summer, and we have helped and we have supported because those students are still returning in the fall. They still need to be comfortable returning to the school setting, so it is our responsibility to intervene. I know there's some issues with privacy and First Amendment rights and kids' ability to say things, so the barometer really is, does it impact a student's ability to safely and physically and emotionally come to school? And I'd argue that it does when those things happen. So not much has changed in terms of whether it's online or in person. it's still unacceptable. It's still something that needs to be reported. Even if things happen online, typically a lot of kids will see it, a lot of people will see it. Most kids don't have one follower on any social media site, on Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat, whatever it is that they're using. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. So typically, the students would be the first people that would see something that's happening. So just like if something happened in the cafeteria and you see it physically, there's probably just as many people, if not more, that are seeing that behavior carrying out online.
Right, yes. It is one of those things where, and even if you're trying to be anonymous, you're not really anonymous, so.
We try to protect anonymity as best we can. Sometimes in the course of an investigation, it is necessary to disclose certain things or where we get certain information, or if we're concerned about the safety or well-being of somebody, we may have to refer, we may have to disclose something that somebody said. But most of the time, if a parent or a student reports something to us and they want to be anonymous, we can respect that, and we can still carry through with the investigation or look into a situation that is obviously impacting somebody.
Yeah. I kind of meant more anonymous, like the person doing the harassing or making a threat or doing something like that. Though they can be found out because those
sometimes we
resources.
can't control that. Like if somebody's held accountable for a certain behavior, we don't necessarily publicize that. We won't speak publicly on disciplinary situations involving individual kids. Obviously, there's privacy restrictions that we have, but Burlington's a small community, as are most communities, and I think oftentimes people will learn of something that's happened. But that's not to say that there should be vigilante justice. I think a lot of times people then will know or might think they learned somebody did something and then do something else. And it's like,
exacerbate the situation.
Two wrongs don't make a right. We always can't publicly say what those accountability measures are, but we do take threats of or cases of harassment, both physical and emotional, intimidation, et cetera, very seriously, and we do use all the resources available to hold people accountable.
Now, a couple weeks ago, there was a couple of incidents in the same week, actually. One of them was, somebody on an Instagram thread, made some kind of comment. I didn't actually see what it was, just knew that it was threatening in nature. It was sort of, I guess, quickly determined that it wasn't a sort of credible threat. How do you go about sort of learning about those things? Is it students bringing it to your attention, or do you monitor them? And then how do you approach sort of, once you see it, what do you do?
I don't monitor social media. I have my own personal accounts on some social media sites, but I don't follow students. I don't. So I'm typically not privy, as are most staff members, not privy to social media communications or situations that are happening amongst kids. We have grade level assemblies at the start of every school year, and we go through a variety of different things for the student body. And one of the things we talk about pretty strongly is that they're the first line of defense. Kids will most all the time hear about a situation happening or something that's developing or something that doesn't look right, something that doesn't feel right, hours, days, weeks ahead of the adults learning of any particular situation. So we always tell the kids, if you see something, say something, right? It doesn't matter if you think it's small, big, insignificant. If you're concerned about something, I tell my own kids sometimes, you get that feeling, right? That sense that something's off, report it. We'll look into it. Oftentimes it's nothing. It might not be a big deal. Sometimes it might be something significant. I think you see across the country there are situations where there are a lot of warning signs, a lot of red flags, a lot of things that pop up ahead of time before a situation becoming dangerous or serious. And those red flags should have been addressed, or they could be addressed differently. Sometimes they're reported and ignored, which is unfortunate, which we would never do, and sometimes they're just ignored. And that's unfortunate because when ignored, it means that there could have been some interventions that might have prevented people getting hurt, again, physically or emotionally, and God forbid, loss of life, which we never ever want to be in a situation like that.
No, of course. And then, I guess there's the other thing that happened, which was, I think people are trying to decide whether or not they think it's, a serious issue or a silly sort of trend. But there was this TikTok challenge that, put out there. It was across the country.
Yeah.
It wasn't something like related to Burlington at all. But, of like doing violence in school. And then that followed up on ones where other challenges were like damaged school bathrooms or,
Rich, it started in the fall. We had a real big problem. It was devious licks or something where kids were stealing stuff from the school.
Yeah.
And
things like that.
It's not hurting anybody, but it's not acceptable. I mean, they were taking dry goods, toilet paper, paper towels, taking soap dispensers off the wall. They're only inconveniencing their peers, and had to lead us to shut down some bathrooms because kids need to be respectful and monitor. We have a Be Smart program, which I think you're aware of. It's a character development program at the high school. There's a digital citizenship course that kids have to audit here at the high school. They get it in their curriculums, in their health and wellness classes. They hear a lot about making good decisions, being a good citizen, having character, being respectful, demonstrate leadership. They're in our core values. We talk about them a lot. We try to instill those things on our kids, and when we see things like that happen, it's disappointing because it doesn't align with how we think people should be treated and expect to be treated when they're here at the high school. Or they were just creating messes, and it's unfair. We have a hardworking custodial crew, and the kids think they're being funny, but there are human beings behind those jokes that have to clean up after them, or have to replace those products, or have to continually fix soap dispensers, and it's just not fair to those hardworking maintenance and custodial folks that we have. That they're the ones that have to really clean up after these kids, funny jokes or whatever. And it does get into serious business where there was one where it was like slap a teacher or something like that, and thankfully it did not happen here, and that's a good thing. But it did happen locally, and I believe a student was either expelled or had some serious consequences because of that, and I'm sure they regret that decision now. But I think it goes into back to my initial point that kids need to know balance. I think it starts at home, and I have middle school, upper elementary age kids myself, and they're getting into wanting phones and things like that. And my family has to make sure that we're communicating responsible use and being a good digital citizen, and what your digital footprint looks like, how you want to be remembered. I say this with kids here, and I use it with my own kids. It's like the billboard test. If you're driving down Interstate 93, and the most recent thing you put on Snapchat or Instagram is up on a billboard,
right,
and you're with your mother or your grandmother or your cousins or whatever, and you're in the car, are you going to be proud of what's up on that billboard? You should be able to say yes, right? And, you don't want to put anything online that you're going to regret, that would reflect negatively upon you. When we hire people at the high school, we check online. We look to see who's rich and what's he up to online, and if it's negative or not in line with the values we have here at the high school, we won't hire them. I know employers are doing the same thing. I have friends that are in the corporate world, and the first thing they do is Google people.
Sure,
right?
I mean, why not?
They look to see what they have, and then that resume will speak for itself. And kids can make mistakes, and I think there are things that you can recover from, but you don't want to purposely put out anything that's going to negatively reflect on you. And that includes a TikTok challenge that somebody might record, and it might live forever. That funny video you thought was hysterical of you ripping a toilet paper dispenser off and clogging the toilet in the bathroom when you were a sophomore in high school isn't going to be so funny if it's still hanging around when you're 25.
No, exactly.
Right?
And it will be around.
It could be, and if someone finds it, I don't know. So that's what we try to get across with kids. I try to get that across to my own children, and I hope common sense will prevail at some point. A lot of it is just silly and immature and lighthearted, and most of it's just fun and harmless. But there is a line that they do cross sometimes, and fortunately it wasn't too big of a problem for us. It did rear its ugly head a little bit in the fall, but knock on wood, whatever's around, it has subsided a little bit, but and like I said earlier, I think it's not going to be the last. Not the first, won't be the last. 20 years from now, when I'm out of education, who knows what will be up then? I don't know.
Who knows?
But it is the world we live in. I think people need to accept that it's there. And it's our job just to teach appropriate use, responsible use, being a good citizen, having good character, and being responsible.
Yeah, well, I imagine the challenge is, when kids spend, as they spend more increasingly time online, that's sort of like where you get your sort of like, your feedback. And the feedback from online is, make this funny post, get the likes, get all the, comments and praise. That can almost overwhelm like, your feeling of like responsibility to your community almost.
Sure. Yeah.
So it seems like that would be like the,
Yeah.
the difficult thing that you're kind of struggling against.
Yeah, no, I think it's led to a lot of like a fear of missing out and instant gratification, kids feeling fulfilled, or adults. I have a lot of my own friends that feel the need to post incessantly what they're doing and sharing everything, and that's great. But I do think there is some mental health implications behind all of this about our ability to connect with other people, in person, one-to-one, in groups, socially being able to interact, professionally in the workspace being able to interact, being able to put your phone down and not worry about what's on there. A lot of times kids just, and adults, again, not just kids, have to check their messages, need to check the Instagram to see what's up most recently. Facebook obviously is out there for the better or for worse. Mm-hmm. So it's just, it's about balance, and the adults need to teach the kids that balance while also instilling how to maintain personal and real interactions.
Yeah. For me, it's Twitter. If I could somehow convince myself to take that app off my phone, I'd probably be a much more productive human being.
Yeah, but Twitter, obviously, and for BCAT, Twitter's great. It's a professional.
It is something we use for work, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's a good source for people to get their news, and it's a good way to share things that are happening. I use Twitter for the school. I use it personally to get information in a different way. It just shouldn't be the only thing, right? And it shouldn't be like something that you worry about or perseverate on to make sure that you're always checking it. And that's what we try to get across to kids.
Now, kind of wrapping up here a little bit, but one of the things, not so much, it's not like, bad actors online or people misbehaving, but there is an impact that I think really hits the high school level students, and that's sort of the pressure that comes from being online all the time. If you're on Instagram and, you post a photo of yourself and you get 20 likes, but then you see, another student posts a similar photo and get 300. People, that has been kind of documented that has a big impact on students. Is that like something you are kind of, that the counselors are aware of, that have resources for, to sort of like kind of help students navigate those sort of feelings of, maybe jealousy or inadequacy, things like that?
Yeah, we have those resources, whether they are a result of online use or other social, environmental factors or biology. We have resources that are available for the spectrum of things that kids might be feeling, whether it's anxiety, jealousy,
low self-esteem kind of
low
things.
Self-esteem. I was alluded to it just previously. It's that desire to get a satisfactory response from social media. How many likes do I have? Did I look perfect? Did I come across good in that? There's this obsessiveness about it, and it can get out of control for some people. And again, it's not just kids. There are adults that are the same way. So yes, we do have supports if kids are feeling any of those range of emotions, regardless of where it's coming from, whether it's online or not. We do have supports, or we can help access supports if they need them outside of school. But again, that's the balance that we're talking about. Like, where's that come from, right? And how do we get across to just society that there needs to be a balance with all this social media use.
Right. Yeah, I think that is the key, balance. All right. Well, that is all the questions that I had for you.
Awesome.
I really
appreciate you having me, Richard.
Well, I
It's been
appreciate
great.
you coming in, and we'll have you back for some other topic at some other time. And
That
we'll
sounds great. Appreciate
Reconnect
it.
then.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally this month, we have a conversation with Burlington Police School Resource Officer Keith Shepard about what happens when online activity can turn to bullying and how he and others in the department work to teach kids about being both thoughtful and responsible when posting. I'm now joined by Burlington Police Department School Resource Officer Keith Shepard to talk about how online activity has sort of changed the way that police and operate with students in schools. Keith, thanks for taking some time to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know you said you've been in, working in the schools, for, at different levels for about 17 years now.
Yeah.
Over that time, how has sort of like the sort of emergence of the internet, social media kind of changed how you kind of approach what you do?
Well, that's evolved tremendously in the last few years, specifically. But even back then, when we first started teaching, it was a lot of with books, and the kids had a little bit more interaction, and then it progressed into, of course, you see the tablets going home with the kids, and everything they know right now is technology. So they're on their laptops, or they're on their iPads or their phones, and that's been integrated into the schools. We've got the technology push in the schools, and we hand them out themselves there. So I see the kids relying much more heavily on their iPad rather than the social interaction, and that's their go-to base. That's what they're working out of, even in the schools. And then at home, when we had the remote learning, that became normal. So kids are comfortable with that, and that's what they seem to know these days.
Yeah, it seems like, a lot of time spent there. And, I think, one of the things that can lead to is, online issues, because, there's a lot of, sometimes bullying and,
Oh, absolutely.
People can sort of find themselves in places online where they get, bad influences. Is there like a way that police sort of can kind of like keep track of what's going on in online spheres just to see what might be sort of like trickling down to our students?
Well, we've got a couple different measures we take. The biggest resource to us is the school itself. I mean, me as a school officer, myself and another officer, we deal with the teachers and the administration, and we'll get the notices of what's going on in schools because, this is where the kids tell you what's happening. But, we do have a cyber officer in place who will kind of research. I mean, way back when there was a MySpace, before Facebook, before Twitter, before all the different online things, we would set up accounts, and a student might think they're talking to another student, so we could kind of monitor things. It could be an officer that had that technology base, that understood that and worked with that, and would oversee things. But today it's really, I mean, we've got Twitter accounts for the station. We've got everything that we receive news really fast. But my go-to is the school and the administrators here. They'll tell me what's happening. I get some from the kids that are talkative and want to talk to me, and then we'll research from there. We'll find out what's happening.
So you kind of not so much rely, but have that as a resource. The students themselves, like they will come to you or
Some
come to
do.
the administration and say, "Listen, I was on Instagram or I was on TikTok and I saw somebody post this sort of alarming or suspicious kind of activity."
Yeah, we'll hear about it from a student if they feel comfortable talking to us. I could hear from another school. A lot of times I'll get different school resource officers and detectives from other schools that handle situations. They might have something in their area. One of the biggest things that I found useful to me is that we have a group of school resource officers throughout the local area that we all get together. And we were having a lot of in-person meetings, and now it's a lot of online.
Sure.
Whether it be Google Meet or Zoom or anything like that. We'll discuss the things that are going on in their area, and we can find out, oh, hey, I've only heard a little bit about that, and I haven't seen too much of that happening here at my school. Tell me what's going on, and we can, brace ourselves and look for things that we find out happening in the surrounding areas. So very useful for, all of us to talk and know what's going on in the different schools.
Okay, so it's a kind of a community of sharing information.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the different school resource officers in the area.
Yeah, well, that must be helpful because there's so much. I mean, it's hard to you monitor. You talk about you're monitoring online, but online is so vast. It's got to be very difficult to sort of know where to even look.
Yeah, it's nice to have a local network where everybody can say, this is happening in your backyard, and we can look for those things. But the kids do come themselves and say what's going on sometimes. especially at the younger levels, they'll say if they've got a problem, they'll talk with their school resource officer. And then, of course, they build rapport with the teachers and the staff here, and they'll talk about it. If we find there's a problem, we look into it.
Now, I know, a few weeks ago we had a couple of different issues. Kind of came down on the same week, actually. But the first one was, more localized. It was a student here at the high school who posted, some kind of threatening remark on I think an Instagram page about Burlington High School, and it was deemed to be not a credible threat. But how do you? So when something like that comes in, how do you go about sort of making the determination of how seriously to take it, and then working with the student themselves maybe to see if they're just being provocative or they're actually having an issue that's going on?
All right, well, first of all, any threat that comes in, whether we find it to be what someone might consider a minor threat to a serious threat, we're going to look into. And we start by seeing if we can speak to the parents first to see if we can talk to the children and the students, and then we'll get together and actually interview everybody and find out exactly what is happening. In my experience, I found most, if not all, students are very forthright. If they think that they've done something wrong, they're not going to try and hide it. Once we come to their door saying, hey, we've got a problem, can you talk to me about this? They're very open about it. And they'll say, hey, I messed up. I didn't mean to say that, or it was taken out of context, or, I just did something silly at a time that I shouldn't have done. I haven't seen a lot of malice in some of the things that have been posted that we found problems with. And that was somewhat the situation here. Someone made a statement that they thought wasn't going to lead to something very much at that time. And that's a lot of kids will make statements like that.
Right.
They don't have that forethought. We've learned in the past that kids don't have that capability to really think ahead until the brain develops at the early age of the 20s, and of course they're making mistakes and not thinking about it, rash decisions.
Sure.
And then we get involved and explain to them the actual consequences of what could happen for their mistakes. And they say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That's not what it was meant for. And very similar in this case, that's pretty much what it led to. Someone made a remark that they didn't feel was a big deal, and we explained it could be taken that way. People's perceptions are different, and you got to respect the fact that everyone's going to be looking at this when you put it on the web.
Right.
Everyone looks at it, and it can cause a threat. It can cause someone to feel threatened. So we follow up on that, and usually very fast investigation where the discussion is made with the person we find it to be, and we can. Again, we have technology officers that can find out exactly where those statements are coming from. From the Instagrams, from the Facebooks, from wherever something's coming from, if we put in a request.
Yeah, so even if something's posted anonymously, you have
Yes.
the resources to...
Nothing's really anonymous. We can find it if we find there's a reason we have to, and these companies work with us. So
Yeah. Now, I kind of wonder, maybe so much of the attention of, focused on this, because there have been a few stories recently of, online threats or, perceived threats made against schools or by students in Massachusetts and other places recently. But I mean, I just wonder, like what you talked about, kids, sometimes they just say things. And this is maybe one of the first generations where, maybe, back in our days, we would say something stupid, but we'd only say it to our friends and, in the park. And now it's like where everybody can see it.
Yeah.
I wonder if that sort of like has,
well,
proposes a different challenge for this generation that no other generation has ever seen.
Well, we were talking earlier before the interview started. That's our world now. I remember being a kid. My father, he was a police officer growing up, and my mother was a teacher. So, anything that happened in school, they kind of knew I didn't get away with anything. But I remember, him saying, when I was younger, hey, don't write it down if you don't want the whole world to see it.
Right, exactly.
And unfortunately, we tell the kids these days, something I say is carry on that thinking, hey, if you put it out there for the World Wide Web, don't put something out you don't want the whole world to see. If you can't show your grandmother and your parents this post, you shouldn't be putting it out there. And a lot of kids think they can hide things or they can delete things, and maybe they don't know that stuff is to be found forever. Even if it's not, even if they delete a post or they take something back, eventually we can still find that.
Right.
It's not gone. It's simply not showing at that time to other people. So if we hear of something, we can look into it and find it. But the kids these days, I don't think that they maybe at a younger level quite realize that. Maybe as they get older they do, and that resonates a little bit more. That I've seen people get in trouble, and I know that this stuff's out there. Maybe I shouldn't post as much. So they eventually learn. But as they get on these technological devices and they're on social media, that's their way of communication now. And,
Right.
And something that you used to say, or we used to say as a kid, you thought, oh, I wish I didn't say that. Well, now that's out there forever.
Right. And back in the day, you'd say it and maybe 5 people would hear it, but now anybody can
Now
hear
it's
it.
everybody, and it's instant.
Right.
It's not word of mouth. It's not rumor. You said that. It's posted.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that came up recently again was there was this TikTok challenge about people going and causing violence at schools. There's been other ones with like silly challenges of like damaging bathrooms was one of them.
Yep,
And I think
I've
we
heard of that
actually
one.
had a couple incidents of that. And then they just seem to keep coming up. And I think most people, us older people, kind of don't know where the heck they come from, but they're out there. So how do you get informed of them? How do you sort of, how do you respond, or how do you sort of try to determine whether or not this is something to take seriously or not?
Well, like we just said, word of mouth is quick with all the social media there, so you hear about it pretty quickly, from whatever direction it comes at you, whether it be a fellow officer who knows about the TikTok post, or a fellow officer that has a child that knows about the post, or myself, my own kids, or administration. We hear about it pretty quick. We look into it. We try and find, what's going on. And I got to say that I do rely on our technological officers because, as myself, an older, more seasoned officer, I don't deal with this as much as some of the younger kids do. This is their world. It's all social media. I'd much rather talk face to face with someone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the guy who makes a phone call instead of an email, but that's not what our kids and our world is turning to now. So, we keep our ear to the ground trying to find these things that are happening, especially the biggest one now. We're talking about the TikTok things. People are putting stuff out there wherever it begins. I can't say I know, but it gets to everyone so quick, and we'll investigate something if we feel it's a threat to our community or our schools or anything that's here.
Yeah. So back in the day, obviously, like if we keep saying that, we sound like two seasoned veterans just sitting around.
Yep.
But bullying and things like that would happen on the in the schools, sort of in the cafeteria, things like that. But now a lot of it is online. People feel more emboldened. Do you work with students on trying to, about, sort of online behavior and talking with them about, one, if they are feeling victimized, or two, just to sort of be like, explaining that, just because you say something online doesn't mean it's not as impactful as saying it right to someone else's face.
Right. Oh yeah, we absolutely discuss with the children in the schools and in the town. And we've, years ago we had a DARE program, and then we had the GREAT program, and we still use those teachings. So we, I believe, and from my years in the schools and the parents and a police officer, seeing that, you get the kids early in school. So we used to have from kindergarten all the way up, and in 4th grade we had a lot of internet safety classes. In 5th grade we had a large program. Everything's much smaller now. We only have maybe one class for 5th grade, 2 classes for 5th grade, and they still focus on bullying. But what the kids know these days that we used to have to teach is cyberbullying, and they know cyberbullying quite a bit. Sometimes they mistake bullying as a harassment or a conflict these days. So I remember teaching that in the younger levels. It's not necessarily bullying because someone gave you a hard time that day. It could be a conflict, and because you might not be as social with people face to face anymore. People do have to understand that there are conflicts that you are going to have to face, and so we try to teach them to deal with those conflicts, and then above and beyond that, recognize and deal with what bullying is. So we start that in elementary school, and we continue that in middle school, and we've had classes with the kids, and we work a lot with the health teachers, a lot with the different teachers in the schools that bring the kids, and we'll have classes with them. So not as much as I'd like anymore, and I don't deal with the younger levels, but the new officers that deal with them, Officer Vito Costa and Dominic Colicchio, who are in the younger levels, they talk with the kids very seriously. They have a good time with it. They make the kids understand some of these differences and let them know, hey, one of the things you have to do is report it. You can't be afraid to say I was bullied. Some kids might feel embarrassed to tell their parents. They might feel too shy or maybe not comfortable enough to talk with a teacher about it because they don't want to get a kid in trouble. They don't want to be that rat that
Right.
turns in a kid, but they're really going to discuss it. That's one of the big things we talk about, decision making at the younger levels. Here in the high school, not so much, but the younger levels, that's really where we address it. And hopefully that carries over because they've had, the lessons already with officers and with teachers about the different types of bullying and how to deal with it.
And I'm guessing, especially if you're teaching internet safety to
Yep.
younger children, that there must also be a focus on, interacting, with making sure you know who you're interacting with, not be falling victim to predators kind of thing. I'm guessing, is that part of the sort of the online?
Yeah,
the
yesterday's
discussion?
term used to be stranger danger, and they don't use it
Yeah.
anymore because that. I'm sure you've heard of some of the different classes we teach. We have Rad Kids class in the summer, which is resisting aggression defensively, and we talk a lot about and how to escape all the way, how to escape abductions.
Right.
So we start primarily with, is all strangers bad? Of course they're not. We were a stranger before you met us. Introductions are needed, what to look for. Kids might think that a stranger is someone who looks a certain way. And we're all strangers. They all look all different, but it was a bad stranger look like. And, then we move up to, the online threats, which are, well, listen, you can't recognize anyone in any way because it's just text or words. Or
Right.
you might be in a chat room, or as you get older, you might be on the social media, and someone could pose themselves as someone else very easily. So if you haven't spoken to someone or know who it is, they could even be posing as, I could think of talking to Rich.
Right.
Because someone could pose themselves as you. And listen, you've really got to go see your parents and talk about what you see online, get permissions first, all the way up to recognizing that you're not going to necessarily know who you're talking to, or, the things that you say could be getting around and, people could find out who you are, what you are, or things you like to do online very easily once you start getting into these chat rooms. And a lot of online stuff that we have to discuss with kids just so that they know what they're getting into.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult for adults. I mean, a lot of adults get scammed and fooled
Yeah.
with online, people online. And I mean, for a child who, usually more trusting, and most maybe even more difficult to sort of thread those murky waters.
Some of our biggest investigations are adults that are, scammed online. There's all sorts of things that take place. The elderly, tricked into taking money from them, or maybe not even the elderly, you or I, into something, where we're getting into something we don't know who we're talking to. So we have a lot of investigations now that are, phone calls to people, online stuff, and people get taken for a lot of money. It's a quick process, but very hard to clear up and investigate.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, I guess we can end with this, just, online, presence, everybody being, sort of keyed into each other in that way. Is it made things more complicated, or because, there are tools, does it make things maybe, a little easier as from the police perspective?
Well, it would not help us. There's things we could do, and there's trainings we have. I would say the trainings are different, and they focus differently now, and you'll see a different police officer than you saw in the 90s when I started, the early 90s. Today's police officer is well more educated coming right out of the department, and they're well more versed in these social medias because they're, at their age, it's something that they've grown up with. And then in addition to that, we have, we train quite a bit, and we always have courses offered, trainings available, on a monthly basis. So you could really dive into any kind of field you wanted to study and get into, become a technology officer, become into a cyber officer where, that's the thing that you do. And I think that tomorrow's police department is going to have more officers behind a desk looking at these investigations with, hard drives and routers and cell phones, and that's going to be their specialty, even more so than the line officer you see today who's knocking on your door because someone broke into your house, or, they don't have to break into your home to have financial gain anymore.
No, exactly. It's just a whole different
Identity thefts and
wild west of the internet.
yeah.
All right. Well, I very much appreciate you coming in and talking about it. It's, I think it's a subject that's out there, and if people are interested to sort of know what is being done to sort of address, these issues, especially when it comes to our kids.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I enjoy being in the schools. It's, a big part of my day. I like being in here talking with the kids, and Not every police officer has that chance, so it's something I feel grateful for, and the school's been helpful, and the town, the people. It's a good place to be in right now.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich.
So there you have it. This month's in-depth look at social media and child and teen development shows that adults are also working to navigate these waters and find the best solutions, but help is out there for anyone who needs it. All adults responsible for young people need to keep up with the trends, know what is potentially out there, but perhaps most importantly, they must engage in open, thoughtful, and honest dialogue with the children in their lives, and to make sure that they know trusted adults are there and there is help if they feel they need it. There was certainly a lot to talk about, and I'd like to thank my guests for helping break it all down. Burlington Youth and Family Services individual and family therapist David Langford, BHS Principal Mark Sullivan, and Burlington School Resource Officer Keith Shepard. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back next month with another edition of BNews In Depth, so stay tuned.